Hello, my Hope More family. I'm so sorry that we had to start a little bit late, but sometimes things take a little bit more time to just get perfect. I just want to welcome all of my Facebook and YouTube family to our Hope More series on back to school. We have dealt with praying, covering over your children. Then we looked at ways to set up your children, whether they're in kindergarten and 12th grade, for financial success in financing their college education. And last week, we dealt with Dr. Deputy Choo Choo and looked at school safety and some of the prevalent issues that are coming up and what our school resource deputies and school resource officers are doing to help make our campuses safe. And today we are going to continue in our back to school series and looking at another covering or another protection, if you would, and it's legal protection. Can you say legal protection? Legal protection. Wonderful. So if you're coming on, please post in the inbox, where you're coming from, where you give a shout out to whatever particular high school, if your children in school or college, go ahead and post below so we can say hello, and back to school. So if you are coming here for the first time, you never heard me share this before, but Hope More is spelled purposely one word, lowercase HOPE and uppercase MORE, because you only need a little bit of hope to expect more in life. So I need you to, in support of this show, and we're going to be talking about legal protection for parents and students, I want you to go ahead and go on your Facebook page or your YouTube and share this show. And if you're in a group and it's not against the rules of your group, please share the show on the group that you think would maybe have parents who would be interested in this title. So go ahead and do it. I'm doing it right now, sharing it to my page. Believe it or not, I have to always share to my personal page as well. And if you are on YouTube, please click the bell so that you subscribe and you get notices every time I come on. So whether you're in the Hope More Facebook family or the YouTube family, thank you all, Hope More family, for being here. So let me go ahead and do that. And what you see below is share. And remember, whether you're watching on live or in replay, you are welcome, so welcome, to put in the comments below any questions that you may have. I try to get back to you even after the show, as well as if you have any comments you want to make or questions to myself or the guests, feel free to share. Okay, I'm still trying to share. Why are you giving me a hard time? Yes, okay, I'm sharing now. Share. I love it. So how's everyone doing? This is what is often called Hump Day, but we don't do Hump Days around here in Hope More, so we call it Hope Day. So how are you doing on your Hope Day? Thank you so much for watching. Okay, I love it. So this week we're dealing with legal protections, and I posted in my my story for Facebook and for the Hope More page, like, what are you doing? How are you protecting your students legally? How, as parents, are you protecting yourself? So we're going to have a discussion about some things, just a few, because there's really a lot of things that could occur in the life and the matriculation of a student. But we are going to be talking about like 4 main things that could be helpful information for you to know, prepare yourself for, and consider getting legal help or representation for. So again, you may not need this information now, or maybe you're getting this information for the future, or if a friend needs it. So encourage them to come on, because better to know than to not know. Better safe than sorry. So last week we had Grace in our presence, a wonderful addition to my Hope Law Firm, as well as to the Hope More Show, and that is Natalia Yarbrough. She is a criminal justice major from Loyola University in Chicago, and she's actually helped produce this segment today, dealing with legal protections for students and parents, and I'm gonna bring her on. And like last week, can y'all enjoy that intro video that gave us a sense about about what safety issues were going on in school nowadays. We're going to start off the same with something that she produced, but I'm going to bring her on. Natalia Yarbrough. Hi, Natalia. How are you, sweetie?
Hello. I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
being on. Many people would not know, but Natalia goes to school in Chicago. She lives in Texas. So when I say 5:30 show, it's really 4:30 her time. So thank you. She's in the middle of I'm about to lose her in a few days, but she's getting ready for school. I didn't know my music was still playing. Let me turn my music off. So thank you, Natalia, for coming. I really appreciate you being on. And I just want to ask, how are you enjoying your intensive internship for the last, I guess, couple of weeks now?
It's been really, really fun. I've really enjoyed exploring more into the legal field that I'm used to in terms of a classroom setting and in terms of just the reputation of certain legal issues. Specifically as it relates to kind of hot topic media items, which was one of the things that we covered in last week's show, which was really fun. And the guest on that show was just a wonderful person. So everyone watching should go back and watch that because that was an awesome show. But I think it's really important to have discussions, not only social discussions, but legal discussions, because I think nobody thinks that anything is going to happen to them until it does,
Until it does.
Right. Yeah. And so, you just never want to be that person stuck in that situation. And so I think it's really important, even if we feel like maybe this doesn't really apply to me, it could. And a lot of times it does. And so I think, especially a segment like today, when we're talking about legal responsibilities, is really important. And I personally can learn from it because, as someone who is now legally an adult, there are a lot of things that I don't know, and nobody really teaches you this stuff. I mean, there's not a manual for you turned 18, here are your rights, here's what you can and can't do, because you still feel like you're an extension of your parents. And in a lot of ways, you aren't legally, technically anymore. And I think parents are also guilty of the same thing, and that they feel like you're still my child, you're 18, just because in 1 year you turned 17 to 18, you don't really have that much more responsibility in their eyes, especially for me, because I'm the first, so I'm kind of like the test subject.
You're a guinea pig.
Right. So I'm like, parents need to kind of, in a way, wake up and realize we need to have a stronger support and structural system to kind of avoid anything negative from happening to both students and parents. But I kind of got into the topic of today. I kind of ventured off, but I've been loving the intensive internship, and it's always fun because you're always doing a bunch of different things. You're never sticking to one thing, so it's always entertaining and keeping me on my toes. So it's been really fun.
And congratulations are in order. I'm just gonna humble brag a little bit. You in your upcoming semester at Loyola, you are now Chief Operating Officer. Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah, pretty much Chief Operations Officer, yeah.
I mean, she's only a sophomore, guys, and she's already ruling things. She probably would never describe it that way, but not only is it working substantially with student government, but it's a paid position. Can we say paid? You are just so outstanding, Natalia. So I'm excited. I'm gonna have you on a little bit more than we did last week. You are our special guest, and I think you're gonna be playing twofold. You did a great job of researching the subject, and you're also a student, both in college and experience being a student before matriculating to Chicago. But so it'd be great to get your insight. So you guys, if you have questions, if you want to just comment, feel free. I want to say hello. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so we're gonna start. I'm gonna bring on your the intro to this particular topic, and
that parenting comes with several legal responsibilities to supervise and control your children.
How about I start over?
Most people are aware that parenting comes with several legal responsibilities to supervise and control your children. However, parental liabilities and rights may not be as clear-cut as one may assume, especially considering the growing age of social media. And as children mature and the boundaries of freedom are blurred, the details of parental liability must be explored for the protection of parents and their children. In this video, I will be exploring parental liabilities as it relates to minor sexual behavior, parental liability for student wrongdoing, legal advocacy at school disciplinary hearings, and parental restriction to medical records of college students. As we all know, minors can be criminally or civilly charged for sexual misconduct, whether it be the production or distribution of child pornography or sexual assault. But when are third parties such as parents also held legally responsible for these crimes? Parental liability for the criminal behavior of their child is most commonly determined by their failure to fulfill their legal parental responsibilities to properly exercise control over their child and avoid said criminal behavior. This causes the main contingency of sexual misconduct liability to be a parent's established knowledge and efficient monitoring. For example, if a child sexting resulted in damages, and this behavior was a result of an obvious lack of device monitoring, failure to notice behavioral patterns, or even knowledge of behavior with failure to act, a parent may be held liable. Typically, this requires either a civil lawsuit specifically against the parental unit or a clear connection between the malfeasance of a parent and damages against the state resulting in criminal charges. 17-year-old Lucinda Bailey was charged with the production and distribution of child pornography, but her parents weren't charged because not only were they not sued in a civil court, but there was no apparent pattern of disregard by her parents connecting to that crime. Criminally liable parents may face jail time, a fine, or form of restitution, and more. This is why it's integral to not solely perform on what is thought to be good parenting, but to abide by its legal requirements. Similarly to the statutes enforcing liability of parents for their child's sexual misconduct, student wrongdoings including damages and violence are also a display of parental adequacy and thus punishable by law. Damages done by a child are enforced under tort law, which includes malicious or willful property damage. This would fall under civil liability rather than criminal, and most likely result in financial compensation of the harmed party. Criminal acts such as violence, however, may result in criminal charges for responsible parents. An extreme case of this instance is the trial of Michigan school shooter Ethan Crumbley's parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, in which they are charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter due to alleged failure to securely store firearms and failure to prevent Ethan's actions that prosecution claims were easily foreseeable. Their accountability for Ethan's actions were constructed on the basis of negligence, and the assumption that his actions could have been avoided if legal requirements for parental responsibilities were upheld, therefore establishing a case for culpability in the murders. University code of conduct violations typically result in an investigation and ultimate decision of guilt or innocence determined by the school board of conduct. There are 2 general forms of offenses which result in disciplinary action: offenses against another individual and against the school, both of which fall under the code of conduct and sometimes even applying to criminal or civil charges. Students most commonly represent themselves during this process, but are given the right to utilize an advisor, someone who gives advice and counsel but is barred from speaking or negotiating on their behalf. Legal advocacy is granted through this role, in which an attorney can assist a student to ensure that they have the best chance of defending themselves. Legal advocacy is most important to ensure that the school's process is just, as many times it is inevident to the common student when their rights aren't completely understood. Take the account of this student, for example. A DePaul University student was expelled from the school once he was found guilty of sexual misconduct for having sex with an intoxicated student. However, once he sought subsequent representation, they found that the school's provisions specifically detailed the necessity of established knowledge of intoxication, resulting in a pricey lawsuit for the school. Had a legal advocate been involved in the process on the student's behalf, both parties could have avoided significant monetary and emotional stress. Even if legal counsel is restricted in their role as an advisor, they can play an instrumental role in researching the details of the violation, the school's complex process, and ultimately be a strong support system for the student. Once a student turns 18, they are granted additional rights as they are no longer classified as a minor, one of which is the right of privacy when it comes to medical records. While a student has the right to deny access to their medical information from their parents, their consent also allows for parents to retain partial medical responsibility. There are three primary ways to do this: HIPAA authorization, durable power of attorney, and advance directives. The necessity of these documents is exemplified in the experience of Sean Myers when a car crash left him incapacitated. His family was out of the country and were given little to no details of his condition as a result of a lack of legal authority. While there are many resources online to aid in the education of access of student medical records, on-campus awareness is significant and encouraging engagement.
Wow, that was really good information. I think you do such a great job on boiling information down. And so, what we're going to do in this sort of talkback session is to go over those four areas that was mentioned in the intro that we're going to be dealing with legal protections of parents and students. And I love how you put that because at the end of the day, we are particularly talking about what ways that the average parent or student can consider their protections. We're not necessarily going to come from the viewpoint of a school or any other entity, because as we are preparing for back to school, there are just all these things that could come up in the next school year that if you are left unaware and unprepared, you can really be disadvantaged in the legal system. So I wanted to go over them one by one, and you use some interesting examples, and I would love to get your feedback on that. So let's start with number one: legal consequences for students' sexual behavior. Now, interesting enough, this one could get people really at arms because we don't, as older adults, don't want to think of our little precious elementary school student or freshman and high school students having and engaging in sexual behavior, which includes everything from potentially intercourse, statutory rape, oral sex. It could be sexting. It could be taking nude pictures and sending it. And I think parents need to understand that if their children are under 18 in most jurisdictions, it would be considered something that's illegal, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the child's age. They may be criminally held responsible. Depending on how many factors are going on, the parents could be held responsible. And I particularly share this kind of information because you don't need it until you need it. But to know that if your child's on TikTok or your child has figured out some way to get an OnlyFans or doing something that's very sexually explicit, it's sort of like the precursor or the step before maybe something illegal. You need to talk to them. You need to talk to them about why it's wrong morally, but also legally. They can get in trouble here in the state of Florida where I am. And all these things are based on the state law and often like school policies and things of that nature. But in Florida, if I'm under 18 and I take a nude picture of myself now and send it to my boyfriend, regardless of what his age is, I now can be charged with distributing child pornography. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And I think most people don't think of it that way because it feels so private. And it's also like, well, it's my body. Like, why am I being charged for some picture that I take of myself? But it's really, really dangerous. And I think a lot of parents are completely unaware of how common it is. I mean, I've all throughout my high school, I think middle school is a little bit too early because most of us didn't really have as many phones or social media as probably elementary and middle schoolers do now. But throughout my high school, I mean, it was a thing. Like people's nudes would get leaked. You know, they would send it to someone and then they would break up and then they would show their friends. And so it's always just the best policy, never, never take it because you just really don't know. But I think for parents too, it's like because all these apps, all these technologies are coming out so fast, it's so hard for them to keep up and be able to monitor it because you're so ignorant of it. And a lot of parents have just kind of taken a back seat and not continue to follow up and monitor, their child's behavior online. because it's just difficult. And, you can delete stuff, you can hide stuff from anyone who's going on your phone. So if you get creative enough, it's really hard for parents to kind of figure out what you're doing. But it's really important. And not only for self legal protection, for a student, and a parent can even be charged too and held liable if it's evident that they just were not paying attention to their child's conduct. Maybe if they knew something or they were suspicious of something and they failed to do something about it, especially if their child may be the perpetrator of some instance, they could easily have a lawsuit filed against them for that.
Really,
Right.
depending on, often it is like, it depends on who the opposing party is. If two youngsters are dating and the parents agree, and for the most part, they've been pretty decent to each other, you'll be surprised at how one infraction that the parents are being made aware of, how all of a sudden these copacetic parents become enemies, because like, not my daughter, and all of a sudden their daughter and their boyfriend, or their boyfriend and their son and their girlfriend are now, you're pitting them as one being a exploiter and the other one being a victim. And and then, if the parents get along, often, let's be honest, the liability often is not raised if no one complains. But like in the state of Florida, you're mandatory reporters. And some would argue that anyone having sex in the state of Florida under the age 16 anyone having sex with a person under the age of 16 is committing statutory rape. So is it possible for two 15-year-olds having sex to be committing statutory rape against each other? Yes. And in Florida, everyone's a mandatory reporter. So it can get really, really messy. And I think when you see the media make not a big deal of underage or minors engaging in sexual activity, they make it seem romantic and cool, but it actually can have some legal consequences that all of a sudden, your A+ student is in juvenile justice, or worse yet, being tried as an adult for a sexual offense. And so I think you gave an example of a parent that was also found liable because of their failure to either was it their failure to basically supervise their children on the internet, or was it more so because the person knew of something happening and failed to report it?
So they didn't give really extensive details on the court report, but basically the charges never went through. But initially, the courts were trying to establish, well, the person filing the lawsuit, there was a 17-year-old girl and a 15-year-old girl, and the 17-year-old had possession of child pornography, with consent, if you can even establish that as them being minors.
Right.
But apparently they were trying to establish that the parent of the person who possessed the child pornography failed to look through their child's phone, knew that their child had a pattern of having sexual content on their phone, and didn't take enough action to kind of prevent it from happening again. I don't think it didn't seem like it went through, just because that's something that's probably really difficult to prove, and probably very expensive for the person who's filing the lawsuit. But I'm sure, like, if resources had been flooded towards that cause, that parent could have been held liable for something like that. So that would have been really scary. And I'm glad they didn't, but at the same time, it's like, I hope that gave them enough of a scare and kind of shock to know, like, this is serious and it's not just kids playing around. And not only can I be held liable and they be held liable, but that's just dangerous in general. I mean, there are hackers, there are creepers online, and they easily can get access of anything stored on our phone. So in the event of something like that being leaked or, accessed by someone without consent, like, that would be really detrimental.
And you say without consent, but if they're underage, they cannot even give legal consent for the
Right.
distribution of their images. And what's interesting is that if they're under 16, excuse me, if they're 16, they could potentially have sex with someone else who's over 16 and not be charged with any sexual offense. But if they took a picture or they decided, like the popular song says, make a movie of their sexual escapades, now they're in danger of child pornography. And then that can be by itself, because they're still minors, illegal, and it could be felonious. So parents need to be aware. And I think the example you shared in your video was a Lucinda. So the child did get in trouble. The 17-year-old did get in trouble, but I think they didn't charge the parents because they didn't have enough evidence of whether or not the parents failed to supervise. So like you said, it can be hard to prove. And we're not suggesting that this happens every day on every campus as far as a lawsuit, but we do know in America, sexting, nude pictures, underage sex is happening every day for the most part in every neck of the country, whether a small town or a big city. So it's important for you to be aware. So when your kids tell you, it's my life, it's my cell phone, it's my privacy, like, listen, it's my bank account, it's your college fund. It's your, not just your reputation, but what you think is funny can totally destroy your future. So I think that's really big, and it breaks my heart. I've been brought into situations where, someone as young as third grade was being accused of sexual touching, and third grade, you're not even 11 yet. Thank God for that, because in that state, I think state of Georgia, they couldn't even go to juvenile justice unless you're 11 years old. But just imagine though how little kids are touching each other on the school bus maybe, and it's funny, but then one day it's not funny, or one day the parent finds out and then it turns into something. So we're going to talk about ways to protect yourself, and you can see one of the first ways, or one of the initial ways, you need to be informed and talk to your parents. And talk to your kids so they are aware. So number 2, parental liability for student wrongdoing, damages, property damage, violence. And we've sort of, it's an easy transition as we talk about liability of parents based on the children's behavior. In this parental liability for student wrongdoing, your example that you brought up was it a Michigan school shooter who parents have been charged also. I don't know to what extent in the shooting, but they've been held, or at least they are legally being reviewed for responsibility for their part in the shooting. And I know a lot of the same factors would go into it, like what did they know, when did they know it, did they supervise? And I believe, if I remember the story right, that same day the parents were at the school because of disturbing images, and I'll let you explain that, but they opted to leave the child there even though they were aware of his problems. And I think they sort of were like, they should have known that he had their firearms because he had access to them. But share what happened. What was that meeting that the parents had right before they left him at the school and he started shooting?
Right. So I think it was actually another student who reported like suspicious behavior. His name's Ethan. But they reported suspicious behavior of Ethan, which kind of led administrators to be on a lookout and kind of investigate further into his suspicious behavior. I think it was just things on social media that kind of raised alarm bells for students. And they ended up getting access to a picture kind of displaying that he had in his possession, kind of displaying like him shooting people, or what looked like him to be shooting people. And so the school calls his parents in and they kind of have this intervention. And the parents were like, we don't really know what to do right now. I mean, they were obviously disappointed and kind of taken aback, but they chose to leave him at school. But then when they get back home, they realize, oh, well, this firearm that we know our son has access to is missing. And the video in there, you could see text messages found between the two parents of them saying, I think he has the firearm and bullets and he's at school, like he may commit suicide, etc. And later that day, before the school concluded, he ended up shooting his fellow classmates. So it was a very kind of sequential process in which the parents seemed like they had several options to kind of intervene. But then at the same time, you kind of have to have empathy in that, like you were saying earlier, like nobody wants to believe that their precious child is going to do something as obscene as what he did. And especially in the same day. And they probably were just like, it's such a random situation. Sorry, my dog's barking. It's such a random situation that doesn't really come in a handbook whatsoever. So it's, while they could have done something, it's also very understandable as to why they may have not taken immediate action or jumped, to the cause.
You know what? You are going to be a great criminal defense attorney, because she said we could have some sympathy. Some parents will say, no, there's no sympathy. But it was a classic. They're able to show step by step some of the huge gaps of a lack of oversight that they had on the child. And it wasn't like it wasn't brought to their attention. And it wasn't like they did not realize that he had the gun with him, most likely at school, but they were more concerned apparently that he may kill himself, or maybe like a lot of people would think, oh, certainly he wouldn't get in trouble. We just was at the school. We're going to pick him up later. There's so many things they could have done, even if they did not go to the police right away or go to the police at all. But parents, you have to think about your duty and responsibility in society to basically oversee what your children do. And if they do something that causes damage, destruction, in this case loss of life, you may need to forget about a lawsuit. You may be going to jail. I know these parents had to, I don't know if they bonded out. I think they may have. And I can't remember, because sometimes there's been so many mass shootings at schools, it's hard to keep up. But you could imagine their life was totally rocked. And so we need to use those examples to help guide and direct us. If something happens and you have a sense and you believe that your children, even if you're like concerned about them hurting themselves specifically, you not only need to let the school know, but this would have been a prime opportunity to take him to counseling, take it very, very seriously, because you don't want not only for your children's future to be broken because now they've done something destructive that's irreversible, like murdering young people, but you also don't want your future forever changed because now you're held liable. So, it sounds pretty extreme, right? On one hand, you talk about irreversible damage, like the taking of lives, but also that could be your child, messing up a school computer network, that child is 14 and they're smart, and you put all this money in computer classes and they figured out how to break in the grid and change grades. Guess what? The restitution that he may have to pay, you may be held liable. They may sue you, saying you should have been overseeing it. So it's important to know that the things that as parents, the things your students do or don't do can definitely touch you criminally and civilly. A lot of times, I've seen parents like, that ain't my problem. Yeah, it is your problem. Until they're 18, it is legally your problem. All right, so thank you. We're moving right along. And again, at the end, I will discuss some just practical ways to consider legal protection, but I may comment as we go on. So the third legal covering that we want to consider is legal advocacy at school disciplinary hearings. Now, your child may be up for school expulsion. Your child may be, in truancy court. Who knows? Truancy hearing. Your child could be brought up on, Title IX sexual harassment functions. I know recently I had a case where a person was found with marijuana in the city, but when that report got to the university, they were suspended and had to go before a student conduct board regarding expulsion. I mean, and could you imagine being at Loyola and getting in trouble for underage drinking and maybe have to go before a board and determine if you're suspended or you lose your job or you are somehow what your activities were outside of school could affect your standing as a student. That is very serious. That's why one of the things that we're playing is like often you really should consider getting a legal advocate to help. And you explained in the video that sometimes lawyers just act as an advisor. They're able to go and sit there. Some schools have rules regarding them actually speaking on your behalf, but just even having and sitting down with a lawyer to consult with them is so important, especially anything that could potentially result in expulsion. And sometimes I get calls at the end, like they've expelled, what can I do? And it's like, man, I wish you would have contacted me before the person was expelled. Did anything you researched sort of strike you as, especially as a student yourself, as like an occasion where you're like, wow, I never thought about it, but I probably would prefer a lawyer in this case? Or have you experienced or known anyone to experience having to do with school disciplinary hearings that end up having a really, really strong outcome?
Yes. So I've actually, strangely enough, had experience with school disciplinary hearings this past year, not as myself, but one of my friends. We had a lot of COVID restrictions in the dorms, and we also have noise restrictions. And so he had a bunch of friends over. He was only supposed to have 3 people in the room because that was the rule. And, it was past curfew and they were being super loud and it smelled like alcohol, apparently. And so he went into the disciplinary hearing, and keep in mind, the only account of this instance was from the RA. And so there was no video, no pictures. They actually attempted, I lived 3 doors down from them and I was in my dorm at the time. So they were trying to get me to like, can you attest? Because I hadn't heard anything, but then again, I was asleep. So I don't know how valid that would have been anyways. But they were like, "Can you come in and share your testimony?" But they would not let have anyone come in and say anything on their behalf. I'm so sorry. And say anything on their behalf. There wasn't any hard evidence. And so they kind of, you sit before the board, you have a discussion about what happened, and then they're like, "Okay, bye. We'll come back to you with the result." And they had one 30-minute hearing, and 2 weeks later they had a result. So I was like, if something this simple, if you're in such a dark, in comparison to the board, if something this simple is complex like that, I couldn't even imagine when you have different accounts and you have, you're not really fully sure what the school conduct is. And there are all these factors. I mean, I couldn't even imagine having to do that by myself. And so that's when I was kind of thinking when I was researching, I was like, if I had a complex situation, especially if I know that the my experience and the experience of others are different in some way, and I may feel like I'm at a disadvantage because of that, I want someone who's experienced to speak on my behalf. And that's when you're obligated to an advisor. But the tricky thing is, they've made a strong point to have kind of like school violations and criminal violations very, very separate. So they kind of, if you have a criminal charge, you deal with that in the courts. If you're guilty, then you can come to the school side and we'll discipline you that way. But if it's just a school, offense, you're not legally guaranteed counsel or defense. But I still think it's really necessary. But they, like I was saying in the video, they're very restricted. Like they can give you advice, they can give you counsel and kind of do the whole research process for you, but they're not allowed to negotiate and speak on your behalf, which is the big difference. Because schools really don't like to involve attorneys in their process, and sometimes rightfully so. But I think it would really be a big, big help for students, especially when you have all of this other stuff going on. Who really has time to be researching and trying to figure out what they can and can't do? I think it would be really awesome to have resources where students could access that advice and that counsel if they felt like they needed it.
Yeah, I mean, your example is very good. I mean, that was an on-campus infraction. If there was alcohol involved, maybe in underage kids, it could affect reporting outside. But I don't believe there's a mandatory reporting for underage drinking. But maybe there is because it's on campus. But you know, if you are that much in the dark about your penalties, just imagine an exculpable. Was it a offense that you can get expelled for. I was like expulsion event. Is there a expulsable? I don't know. But and every school is different. But you do need, in most instances, be aware that even if you hire an attorney may not be allowed to speak. An attorney may not be allowed to negotiate. However, rules are interestingly not just dealt with on the perspective of whoever is trying to interpret, but there have been, like, I was a part of a university conduct hearing in, what was it, April? And I was like, oh, they said you could advise. It was definitely hard to negotiate, but even getting a hearing date, like my client was fighting to get a hearing date because it was the end of the school year, right? And they were like, we just want to hurry up, but he wants to go back to school somewhere. And if they keep your transcript, you can't even transfer somewhere else. It's just really, really interesting stuff. But when I went into the hearing, what they end up allowing me to do is to ask him questions. So I wasn't able to give a prepared statement, but I was able to help direct him by the questions I asked. And also, I was there to suggest that he not answer. But more two phases, because he had already resolved in a preliminary matter his criminal case, but it was not yet dismissed, but it would be dismissed in a year. So I didn't want him to put anything on record that if they decided to prosecute and not drop, that it would become evidence. So that, you know, he was charged with possession and intent to sell. So you could imagine that's much different than, say, having a party in your dorm. But either way, you may want to consider paying a $300, $400 consultation fee for an attorney just to go over the circumstance, because something that seems small could turn into something big, especially the more trendy. When I say more trendy, the more politically hot issues like sexual harassment, sexual harassment, drugs, firearms. I mean, those type of things, you probably need to almost assume, if you are caught red-handed, that you will not be welcome back to that school. And that could be a whole nother show, because even the earlier you get an attorney, they may suggest, if you got arrested on the outside of campus, that before there's been any notice sent to your school for you to withdraw, so that you can deal with that, and it's not the reason you've not been expelled or suspended. It's very interesting how things can play out, but that's really big. School disciplinary hearings. And I want to say, even for EEP type hearings, where it's not about a child's conduct or a student's conduct being punished, but you need rights to access to certain special need tools, depending on how your experience has been with the school and those type of services, you may want to consider talking to an attorney, paying that 1 or 2 hours for them to review things to help prep you. It may save you a lot of time and energy. And our last one for today's show is parental restriction to medical records of college students. Now, that's a long title for basically when your babies are in college and they're 18, there are access to their medical records in particular and other things that you would think, okay, I can just speak on behalf of my baby, this is going to happen. Au contraire, in a lot of states, I would say the default is that you don't have a right to that information, and you could be paying every bill and they can still be on your insurance, but the federal law provides protection for that. And I think that's really interesting how things that you would, if I'm paying all the bills, then I want access to whatever I want access to. And the story that the example you gave in your video presentation was a student, was they hurt while their parents were out of the country, and the parents were having problems assessing medical information. And that just seems, wild that the lack of having some type of form or document that says this person has access is not more commonly shared with parents to have that. As a student, would you have any issues with your parents were like, hey, we need you, because you're 18 now. Well, wait a minute, you're 19 now.
Yeah.
It. So we need you to sign this HIPAA waiver so we can access medical records. Or, if something happens with your bank account and we're not on a signer on it, we want you to sign this power of attorney. So if something happened, we would have access to make financial decisions. And, we want a health directive for you to determine, your end of life, even though you're 19, end of life issues, if you're not able to really make that decision. What is that, something like that conversation with parents, what would that be like for you? Is that something you would welcome, or you're like,
Well, when I was doing this was actually the very first time I ever even considered. This is the first time anything like HIPAA or power of attorneys has ever crossed my mind, because they just don't tell you that. I mean, I've personally never heard it before ever, and I haven't heard of any of my peers dealing with this either. So I don't really know what I would do. I mean, I think right now I'm pretty comfortable with my parents having access to my records, and having the responsibility to make decisions on my behalf if I was for some reason unable to. But I think it gets tricky once you get a little bit older. I think because I'm 19 now, and like you were saying with the insurance, I'm still very, very attached technically to my parents. I think it would get tricky when you kind of enter that early 20s stage where it's like, I'm on my own. I have my own bills. I pay my own bills. Like, I don't want my parents to know when I'm getting tested for STDs or, whatever. Especially that I feel like is a big one, that maybe the biggest one that would make people be like, ooh, do I want my parents to know all the details? Whatever. So I think that early 20s stage is when it would probably be in most demand for people who at least know about it. But I think parents will probably want to hold on as long as they can. But if I had to assume, I think people in their early 20s, if they're not married, they're like, yeah, I'm on my own. I don't want you to have access. But then again, it's like, if you're a solo unit, you do have to consider what to do in the event of incapacitation. And especially if you're not somebody who's very familiar with your own medical records, maybe having a second person to kind of give you advice and kind of be that eye and lookout for you would be helpful. But I think the main issue is people just really don't know about it, especially people who don't have existing medical issues already. They've never been to hospital. I mean, for me, I've never luckily been in a hospital or have had to deal with any close to like life decisions. So that's something that's just never been on my radar. And I think it's that way for a lot of people too. And then, out of the blue, like the guy in the video, you get in a car accident and it's like, whoa, we've never even considered what to do in this situation.
Yeah, I think the first time I ever heard about this was, I don't know if you were even born yet. There was a Virginia University. I don't know if it was University of Virginia. I don't know the combination, but Virginia was in the word, and university had the shootings, and the parents could not get access to the mental health records of their son. And just like, I could imagine how fretful that was, because he was also acting suicidal, like he was going to counseling. And not that just because your parents have access, they're going to be sitting there like, let me see what's happening tomorrow. Because I know it's hard for me to get my own medical records. But in the case of you need to trust somebody. So I would think parents would be a very helpful person to trust. In fact, we have an attorney, Janelle Williams, who is an estate planning attorney. She also has a background in juvenile justice as well as criminal justice. And she actually is working with college students now to prepare HIPAA waivers, power of attorney, health directives to help parents. And I actually was trying to look up her video because she wasn't able to be with us today, but I will take the opportunity to share her information now and when the show ends, because she is a great resource if you're in the state of Georgia, because these things do need to be in compliance with state law. If you're in the state of Georgia, consider connecting with Janelle Williams of Georgia Wills and Trust. That's Georgia Wills, plural, and Trust, 1T, not plural. She's amazing at what she does, and she works in estate planning. And this is the kind of stuff, if you want to get with your child and get these paperwork type of things done, and you're in the state of Georgia, please contact her. And most attorneys, family law, probate, estate, they can get these documents to you. But she, in fact, is right now working on a project to make sure that people have that information. And hopefully I can have Janelle here next month or in the next couple of months. She is a go-getter and sometimes hard to catch up with. But yeah, so she would be great in determining like some of those access issues parents could have in college. So we're coming to the end of this show. And I know we started a little bit late. So thank you so much, Natalia, for being on. I wanted, and Natalia's going to have to leave, but I wanted to just give you the floor to share any particular learnings that you see now that you've looked at this types of situation that you think that you are now wanting to follow up or consider as a student yourself, or maybe something that you got, high school student siblings coming up, that there's anything that you're like, oh yeah, I really want to share this piece of information with my parents or my siblings or someone I care about that I didn't think about until this particular research project.
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. I would say two main things, specifically for my siblings and just family members, students from elementary to high school. I think being able to research the consequences of online behavior, specifically sexual behavior, is just really concerning. And I think that parents need to be more diligent in monitoring their student online, and not just for the sexual misconduct, but also for instances such as the school shooter we were talking about, Ethan Crumbley. Maybe if his parents were more diligent in monitoring his phone, they would see the concerning social media posts. They would see his search history of him looking up how to do a school shooting. I mean, there are so many instances that could have been prevented if parents were more diligent about searching their phones. And so I think a really good thing too that would help with that, and I'm not sure to what extent they're provided online, but just courses, like simple technology relevant current courses on how to use this app, how to access X, Y, and Z. Because again, a parent looks in their phone, they're like, what app is this? And what am I doing? And it's like, obviously your child's not going to sit there and walk you through how to look through their stuff. So that was the main thing for me that was really concerning. And disciplinary hearings as well. As a student, I've actually considered, they have a board of students who work for the Code of Conduct board. And those students were actually the people who kind of delegated the interview and the initial kind of informational meeting of here are your rights, etc. They were the people for my friends who were involved in that conduct hearing. And so I think just I'm kind of interested in becoming more involved in that process, and ensuring that it's, if legal counsel is not allowed, at least there's some transparency there. And so those two things were really brought to my attention, and I'm excited to see where that takes me.
Well, I think you have a wonderful legal eagle mind. Would you all, I feel you in the spirit, even if you're watching on a replay, give Natalia a warm Hope More applause. She's been so, I may have to scoot up some money and try to hire her to assist in some other shows throughout the school year, but she's busy being who she is. Thank you so much, Natalia. And I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. You guys say
Thank you, of course. Bye.
here, Natalia. Really appreciate it. She did a wonderful job. So as we end our time, and again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them below. Even when the show ends, we'll try to answer it. So now that we've gone over and discussed like these 4 areas that parents would do well to consider putting in place legal protections, I know you want to talk about ways to legally protect parents and students, ways to legally protect them. And so I want to talk to you about these ways. And what's interesting, right, is that law at its core is about justice, it's about equity, it's about fairness. So when you say legally ways to protect, 7 ways to legally protect, they all won't come in a course book. They all won't be meted out in a courtroom in front of a judge. They all won't be across somebody's corporate table and deposition. It starts with some common sense of knowledge, because the lack of knowledge is never a defense. If you didn't know, I didn't know it was against the law to, smoke weed here. I didn't know that it was against the law for my child to be involved in a sexual explicit picture at 17. I didn't know that. Well, that's never a defense. So when I go these 7 ways to legally protect parents and students, I want you to put your common sense hat on, your knowledge hat on, and just keep in mind these things. And they're so important. These are the Hope Guides of 7 ways to legally protect you, parents and students. A, research your local school codes and university student conduct policies. It's important. You get every year, usually, student conduct codes, and it's easy to be like, throw it under the drawer, or it's on the website. It's easy to be like, oh, I'm not worried about it. I would suggest that you review at least annually what those code sections are. See if there's any changes. Make yourself aware, because you'll be surprised at things that could even change. I mean, I know some schools, their dress codes are really important, and you can get suspended for the length of a skirt. You want to know that before the first day of school. You don't want to all of a sudden be dealing with your child in the principal's office for something that you could avoid. So, A, research your local school codes and university student conduct policies. It's very, very important. You don't have to be an expert in it, but usually just perusing it, there may be something that stands out about conduct, including, say, if you're an athlete or a cheerleader, often if you get caught in possession of alcohol, you can lose your spot on the team. It's important that your kids are playing football and they want to go to a Division I school. And I really don't understand all that takes, but you need to know what's required. What conduct could keep them away from their goal? What kind of classes and grades and interactions do they need to do? How could they be penalized? I didn't even know that you can be prohibited from playing for up to a year under certain rules when you move to a different school and you're in football. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. But they do it for fair competition. And so you need to know that before there's an incident or an inquiry. Those are very important things for you to know. And not only should you know it, talk to your own children. Be open. Talk to them about what some of the rules are. And it's your child, your child. If you see something in there, particularly relating to conduct, that can get them in trouble, and it may be an area that maybe when they're in elementary or primary school, they got in trouble before, but now they're in big middle school or high school. So you want to like reiterate, without suggesting that they will get into trouble and they haven't changed, but like, let's talk. You're in third grade and you were playing, handsy with your girl, with your little friend on the bus. Well, you were under 11 years old, and remember that mother got upset. Like if you did that now on a school trip, you can be charged with sexual battery. So it's important that you talk to your kids, be open, be honest with them, and also highlight an area that they may have like innocently or wrongfully got involved with at earlier ages. Like, you got to be careful. And I also put discipline here, is that you need to keep your child disciplined. And I'm not talking about spanking, even if that works for you. A lot of this is really middle school, high school age. And I think most people don't do corporate punishment at that time. But my grandmother used to say, if I don't discipline you, the man's going to discipline you. That wasn't exactly the word she used, but basically, if I don't make you deal with consequences and punishment, the society, the world, the jail has a way to get you to understand. So when I say talk to your kids, be open about what happens in life, but also let them know if you have a particular rule, particularly as it relates to conduct, them getting upset, them violating other people, you need to discipline them, because if they don't, they got a detention center that will. See ways to legally protect, practice scenarios, role play potential dangers with your children. And this is not just for Black parents dealing with maybe Black sons who are driving and get pulled over, how you should handle it, but use the opportunity of what's happening in the news, use the opportunity, maybe what happens in your family, what you hear, to talk about it. Like if you go on a date with a young girl, a young lady, and she wants to send you a nude picture, what do? Let's talk about it. If she sends it to you, still, or if you send one to her, and this happens, what is going to be your excuse? Help them think out. Like, let them be the first person in their own legal protection. Like, how are you going to explain this? You are trying to go to college on a scholarship. How are you going to explain to your college that you wrote this on Instagram? It's not even about liability that would send you to jail or make you pay damages, but you can lose scholarship money. I know a young woman who posed her prom picture with assault rifles in her hands, and the school that she had gotten a full ride from, because that went viral and it came to their attention, they withdrew their college fund. So role play potential dangers. When you're stopped by the police, how should you respond? When you're questioned by the police, and we're going to get to that a little bit, how should you respond? Should you, it's like, you're sir, I would like an attorney present? Or when are there opportunities to share what's going on with a principal or a teacher, and not necessarily feel like you can't share? So you need to go over those scenarios. Don't let it, within your reasonable power, their first interaction with these scenarios be because them or their friends are caught up in a situation. So D, I'm sorry, I was going backwards. D, teach your children de-escalation and self-possession, especially with authority figures. And that's sort of a nice transition from my last point. Teach them. They may have been hit in the face. They may be the victim of bullying, but by the time they get and muster up the strength to sort of like fight back, the principal's there and the teacher's there, and instead of being self-possessed and de-escalating and calming down, now they become an aggressor and they're cursing out the teacher and the principal. I can't tell you how many situations I've dealt with where a person who really was being victimized could not control their anger or their fear or their response. And by the time a legal authority, a police or someone came, they showed their butts and then themselves becomes an aggressor and have to deal with that. It's important. How many times things can be excused with an apology if your child is in the wrong or you're in the wrong? That can blow up because someone said the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. You need to teach them that. So when you're talking to them and they puff it at you, you have to remind them, like, I'm not just trying to be right. I'm trying to make sure you're good. Like, I'm your mother. I'm not trying to hurt you. So if I tell you to do something, even if I'm wrong in the sense of, in that moment, whatever I'm telling you to do is based on something that I misunderstood. I need you, unless it's going to hurt you, to do it and allow for a space like, hey, mom, can I talk to you? This is not how it goes. But you have to understand the need to be able to be self-possessed, to be able to calm yourself down, to be able to keep your wits about you is so important. I think people underestimate that. That is the first line. If people got that, there will be less people arrested and less people sued. Now, this is getting more on the technical legal side. A way to protect yourself legally is memorialize everything. When you meet with teachers and parent-teachers conferences, when the school calls, particularly, it doesn't even have to be a bad call, but they may be calling to say your child got hurt, and then like the next 2 weeks they call to say your child got hurt again, and then in a month from now your child the child got into a fight, and you find out from your child, like, every time they got hurt, they were being pushed by that same person, and you've memorialized enough that, like, you put two and two together, so you can help your child. You can help advocate for your child, not to excuse their wrongdoing, but often people know and remember there were other things, but they can't put their hand on it. They don't know. As a parent, in your calendar, just memorialize it. You never know when you have to go back to it. You never know a conversation with a teacher about your child's over talking in class, how that can turn into later some situation where a teacher is saying your child was disrespectful or insubordinate. Like, you need to make it known to your child, to yourself, and to whoever you're dealing with, that you're making note of what is going on. Problematic reoccurrences like talking, missing class, you need to keep up with that. You be the expert on your child's whereabouts and how they get along in school. And the second part is collect potential evidence as soon as possible. So your journal or your information that you're collecting is also evidence, but say something happened, something that seems so just benign, but your son or daughter is like, well, my bestie recorded it. Get a copy of that. It may not be something that's admissible. It may not even be an occurrence that really would be to the level of any interaction with law enforcement or leaders at the school, but just get in the habit of collecting and then releasing after a reasonable amount of time. Maybe your kids are at high school, you don't have to worry about it anymore, but you'll be surprised at often there's evidence that was available that went away because no one gathered it at the same time. No one grabbed the names of the person who was in the lunchroom when somebody was hit. But yeah, collect potential evidence as soon as possible. If your child's being bullied and you want to follow up with some legal action or consider it, take pictures of your child's injuries. It could be as simple as that. You don't have to be Perry Mason. And best yet, I would not want you to be an investigator per se and be accused later of harassing potential witnesses, but just make note. Okay, that was Lisa from 3rd Street. Her mama works at Kroger. Okay, she saw it. So that if anything comes of it, you have that information. Letter F, limit exposure. Limit exposure. And when I say exposure, I should put limit liability exposure. So, and this is going to be a little bit nuanced, but consider, especially where your student or even yourself as a parent may find yourself in a situation that could make yourself criminally liable or civilly liable. Limit the exposure. In other words, do things that we have guaranteed protection from. If police need to talk to your child and they come on school, the resource officer comes on school, depending on the situation. But if you're like me, I'm gonna tell my child every time, call my mother, or I don't feel comfortable talking without my mom. But the one thing, especially in the public school system, that you can do that they cannot violate, or it may be not admissible in court, is for you to say, I don't want to talk without a lawyer. And your parents may not be getting lawyers, but tell your child, you get in a fight, they claim you stole something, they bring you up to the principal office, just say, I don't feel comfortable talking without a lawyer. Can you call my parent? My parent knows who my lawyer is. And let your mama get up there just as a way for them not to accidentally overshare in a way that will hurt them in the future. Another way of limiting exposure, and this is getting a little bit deeper, when your child is involved with a situation, a conflict that particularly has civil and criminal liability attached, or you yourself, do not disclose to non-essential people. Tell your accountant, your lawyer, maybe your doctor. And this also includes your family. And depending on the age of your child and depending on the depth of the possible problem, it could even include you. It could even include you not knowing all the details, because there is no parent-child privilege. There's no parent-child confidentiality in the sense that you may be called, subpoenaed to testify, and there are information that they can get from an observer, a parent, someone who heard a confession, a cousin. They can subpoena them and make them share what they heard, but they can't make you testify against your own interests. So especially if there's something really big like a potential criminal case, then it's not unusual for me to suggest to the parent, let me talk to the student first. And then in talking to the student, I'm gonna share with your parents that I'm suggesting that you do not tell your parents this aspect, or everything you tell me is confidential, because they can't subpoena me, but they could subpoena the parents. So limit the exposure, limit how much is being known. Don't post stuff on social media. Don't, all these things that we do when we're aggravated, testify about all the details in church. Just limit, especially until you get a handle on what may be out there. Letter G, seek an attorney or legal help as early as practical. I say attorney or legal help because everything doesn't have to be answered by an attorney, but legal help could be you seeking from an attorney or a law firm and getting power of attorney, HIPAA waivers, and things of that nature, just so that you have the peace of mind that if you have a college-age student, you have access to their medical records, to their financial records if need be. And I say as early as practical because sometimes the money's just not there to get an attorney. But if you only have money for 1 hour consultation, get it. If you are in a situation that has come to light that will have some civil or criminal liability, meaning in short, you can be sued, or you can go to jail, or your child can be sued. Well, if they're underage, they can't be sued. You would have to be sued, or they could be punished by the juvenile justice system or the school system. Those are times you need to consider seeking an attorney. So those are the 7 ways to legally protect parents and students. Is really, really broad. And like I said, legally, we first start with the practicalness of equity, fairness, and justice. And knowledge is power. So I gave you A through G, but I wanted to give you a bonus way to legally protect parents and students. And those of you who know, the bonus is know and be known. Know and be known. What do I mean? Don't let the first or only time you ever come in contact with a teacher, a principal, university dean, law enforcement is because your child is in trouble or being accused of something. Because that, like any other thing, right? What you want them to know is that you are a concerned and involved parent. But if you already have even the smallest modicum of rapport with leaders who have authority over your child, then when something arises, they are already familiar with you. And maybe that thing that arises, you're so upset, all they see is your anger, but they've met you on the first day of school and open house and at the recitals and football games. You've made yourself known, and they've seen you as cordial and kind, because sometimes emotions do get out of hand. You want more opportunities for positive interaction than not. And being known, You want, particularly the principal, the university dean, law enforcement, especially your resource officers at school, to also know who you are. You know who they are, and they know who you are. It will work to your advantage, especially if you've been respectful, but it also shows that you're not the one to play with. Let me tell you something. My mama, Carolyn Demps, was an educator and soon a school administrator, but apparently because she was known to have a very forthright, strong personality, I was called up to the office because somebody said Walter Horn, I think it was in sixth grade, said that I scratched him on like some school trip. And what was interesting is I didn't have any fingernails. I bit my nails all the time. There was no way I could scratch him. I don't even think I touched him, but it was during the time of like zero tolerance, no touching, no touching, no touching. And I was brought to the principal office. I want to say that was the first time in sixth grade I was brought to the principal. Actually, I've only gone to the principal's office for being in trouble one other time, and that was fourth grade, but we'll talk about that later. So, they told me to sit down, and I was like, I didn't do anything. And they're like, well, we're going to call your mother. And they looked up my information, like, your mother's Carolyn Demps? Oh, and I heard the I don't want to say it was the principal. I can't remember if it was a principal. It was someone that worked for the principal, or the principal mumbled, oh, she's a troublemaker, or she doesn't play, or she's going to cause trouble. And they were like, you know what? On further thought, you just go back to your class. Keep your hands to yourself and go back to your class. So they knew they couldn't come to my parent with no mumbo jumbo mess. So they decided a different course. Now, I'm not suggesting that the people you deal with should be intimidated or like, oh, you're a troublemaker, because my mom wasn't a troublemaker. But they knew that if there was something to contest, if there was something unjust going on, my mom was going to leave it to chance to expose me to even getting something read up on my record. So a bonus in legally protecting is to know and be known, so that your first and interaction is not based on trouble, but also that the people are already aware that if something's going on, you are responsive. And you'll be surprised at how many times, especially when you have underage or minors, that things get squashed with an apology and a sense that that parent is going to take care of it. So even if you're on the college campus, know the university dean by name, know who you need to talk to if something goes down, because you give them something to relate to. And it's harder to be harsher in punishment. It's harder to sue when you have more pleasant memories of interaction and you have a great reputation. Your student has a great reputation of being reasonable and being mindful and not doing harm, than if their only interactions like when something happens and is based on that child's behavior at the time, or even your response. This show has gone a little bit over than normal, but I think this is a good show to keep in your arsenal as you're looking at legal covering, just things to talk about. I can take one of these many points and just have a show on it by ourselves. We've been really funny. We've been having a lot of fun to actually bring these issues to you, both because they're practical, but also just spurs conversation. And so I wanted to let you know that if you are interested and you live in Georgia, of doing the document collection and getting your HIPAA waiver, a power of attorney for your child, a durable power of attorney, a health directive, the person you should definitely connect with is Janelle Williams, attorney at law. I'm gonna put her picture back up here. She's so pretty. She'll probably hate me for doing that, I said. But this is her information. Please contact her. She was going to be a guest, but she's going to catch us next time. It's my fault. But this is her number. This is her website. And her name is Janelle Williams. She was a contributor, although I wasn't able to get her IG video up. But you can also find her on Instagram at Georgia Wills and Trust. That's no S on Trust, an S on Wills. You'll find out more about the kind of work she does. And she's also a great attorney in other areas, but she's an estate planner, and she's definitely interested in setting up our college students to win as they go away. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing and commenting below. We think so much of our students, that we want our students to be ready for the world, and that it shouldn't be derailed because of some legal situation that could have been avoided if someone just thought about the scenario and acted in a way that can preserve their rights and preserve your ability to be able to support and to get the best out of your life for you, your family, and your students. So this is Hope Moore. Love you so much, and there's nothing you can do about it. Next week will be our last series episode dealing with back to school. So listen out. We're going to be talking about community covering. You need more than the teachers, principals, janitors, resource officers, preachers, prayer warriors, lawyers to help your students have a good year. And one thing that we can do as a community is offer ourselves free of charge, or at a small modicum of charge, offer ourselves throughout the school year to make our students, and I say our community students, great with the use of community. So I love you guys, and I will talk to you next week. Bye bye.